This week's episode is brought to us by The Bands I Like Only Charge $18. They're releasing a compilation album called The Sun Will Rise on Better Days. The album will raise money for the charity Trans Lifeline. It is 14 tracks from 16 artists, including ska bands such as Backyard Superheroes, Joker's Republic, Voluntary Hazing, and Leonardo Divorcio with a guest spot by K. Moy. The album comes out on September 2nd. It will cost $2, but you can donate more if you want to. The Sun Will Rise on Better Days, out September 2nd. Pick it up. Okay, gang, here we go. The In Defense of Ska tour with Mustard Plug, Bucko 9, and Omnigone is hitting the West Coast this September. Tickets are now available. This is a tour you won't want to miss. Aaron Carnes will be there reading new chapters from the expanded edition of his book and answering questions. September 8th, San Diego. The 9th, Las Vegas. The 10th, Mesa, Arizona. The 11th, Garden Grove. The 12th, San Jose, California. The 13th, San Francisco at Bottom of the Hill. 14th, Sacramento. 15th, Eugene, Oregon. 16th, Seattle, Washington. And the 17th in Portland, Oregon. Be there.
Comedian Turner Sparks likes ska so much, he decided to name his upcoming comedy special Double Happiness after the Slow Gherkin album of the same name. Turner grew up in Sacramento, California, and would frequent ska shows at local venues. Some of his favorite groups were RX Bandits, Les Distics, and Link 80. Turner became a comedian years later after moving to China, which is a long story. He also hosts the Lost in America podcast, where he interviews comedians in other countries about what's happening socially and politically over there. His comedy special Double Happiness releases on Get Her Done Records on September 30th. You can pre-order it on iTunes right now or get a signed copy directly from Turner at turnersparks.com.
All right, Aaron, why did you want to have Turner Sparks on?
I wanted to have Turner Sparks on because he likes my book and listens to our podcast. And also is a great stand-up comedian.
And
oh, yes, and he's a huge Adam Davis fan.
Turner used to come see Link 80 play at Capitol Garage and other spots in Sacramento. The show that really sticks out to me at Capitol Garage, we played like a matinee show, and there was some really young kid there who was crowd surfing, and they got their eyebrow split open.
Ooh. And
so somebody patched him up with the first aid kit out front, and I think all the bands gave him shirts and stuff. And so he was stoked. He wasn't really hurt. And his mom came to get him, and he was all stoked, and he was showing his mom all the stuff that he'd gotten for free from all the bands to like show sympathy. And she turned to the promoter and was like, "Well, what do I get?" I like to imagine that kid was Turner. I know it wasn't, but
yeah, it probably was though.
It probably was.
You saw Link 80 back in the day when Adam was in the band?
Yes. I was scared of your band.
Why were you scared?
Well, no, I liked him. I was a fan of the music, but I think like everyone I knew was kind of, you guys were this intimidating crew. And I don't think personally, and not even you guys, it was the crowd. I remember I was going to the show. It must have been in the winter. I grew up in Sacramento. It was at a cafe. What's that cafe downtown? Capitol Garage, maybe. And I don't know if that name rings a bell to you. But I remember, this is hilarious. I was getting out of the car, and it was in the winter, so I had like a long sleeve T-shirt on, and my uncle sold copiers, and so it was Sharp. Remember that brand of copiers, like Sharp? So it said on my T-shirt. And I got out of the car, and my friend was like, he was in another car, and he's like, "Dude, so what are you doing with that shirt?" And I'm like, I don't know. What are you talking about? He's like, "There's going to be, that's like the name of a skinhead group that just goes out and tries to fight people." And I'm like, "No, I didn't know that." And he's like, "Yeah, you might want to flip it inside out or change shirts or something." He's like, "They're anti-racist, but they just fight. All they do is fight." And they might think you're trying to make fun of them by wearing the shirt. And I was like, oh, man. So I think I flipped my shirt inside out to go watch you guys.
Wait, did you have a shaved head?
No, I was just some kid.
It would have been fine.
I know. In hindsight, I would have totally been fine. But that It was just like you're from the Bay Area. I was in a band in Sacramento, a ska band, and there was this sense of seriousness. It was like we were just all screwing around. We were serious about what we were doing, but there was a sense of like, real audience members are going to be at this show. So you just got to be like on your toes a little bit.
What was your band called?
We were called Fat Kids on Mopeds.
Nice.
Yeah, it was fun. We played all the time with Les Distics, who you might know.
Sure, we did a split 7-inch with them.
Yes, yeah. So I'm good friends with like Dennis, who was the trombone player who took over for Steve, I guess, who joined your band, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we played with them, and then there was like 5 ska bands in Sacramento, including. Well, no, there was 5 ska bands and so we just did all the shows. Like literally every show we did was the exact same bands on the bill, except for then every once in a while there'd just be some kind of like Papa Roach ripoff band thrown in the middle, and everyone would that's when people would go get a drink, you know.
Well, name the bands. Let's hear the band names.
The ska bands they were all good, by the way. Everybody was good. There was Les Distics always headlined. And then sometimes Suck a Punch would come down from Reno.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a band called, then Dennis's band was 3 Foot Wookie. And then there was Godot, this other band from near us, waiting for Godot to play. And then there was us. And then we were 15 years old, and they were all maybe early 20s. We were 14, 15, 16, something like that. So we were always the opener. And then we just got to hang out. And then there was 2 other bands in the area, but they never would play with us, which was Punch the Clown from Davis.
Yep.
And Filibuster, who was just they were just awesome. They were kind of gone by the time we were they were already touring, and they seemed much bigger and far away, but they were great.
Oh yeah. Filibuster was a couple years older. So
yes. Yeah. They had already put out a few albums. They were just established, it seemed like. And yeah. And then there was one other band. I forget the other band's name, but it was more like a Sublime thing. There was no horns, but they had a DJ. You know what I mean?
Do you remember the name of any of the Papa Roach sounding bands?
Yeah. There was way too many of them, first of all. And they all got signed to major record labels. I remember just be kids at my high school. They'd be they just got $1 million from Elektra Records. And you're like, what? They have 2 songs. I've seen them at the Battle of the Bands, you know? There was a band called Leisure. Awful. A band called Simon Says. They played at our lunch at high school every 2 weeks, and all of a sudden Madonna gave them $3 million because they kind of sounded like Papa Roach, I think. The real issue was that who was the ones that were really good? Do you know what I'm talking about? Originally was on Madonna's record label from Sacramento.
You about Deftones?
Deftones, yeah. They're great, but I do blame them because then there was 100 bands who tried to sound like them. And then when Papa Roach hit, I think the industry just decided you know how all it took, it was Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and then everyone's Seattle, that's everything now. There was a brief 3 months where the record labels were wait, Deftones and Papa Roach are from the same place? Then they must all be good. And so then that happened. I don't know did you guys overlap? Did either one of your bands play with all those?
Oh yeah. Link 80 played the Papa Roach CD release show for the big album with Last Resort on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How? Yeah. By the way, I was visiting my parents in Sacramento the other day, and I saw that guy at the Roseville Galleria. Hilarious. And he was like a dad. He was with his kids, and they were annoying him, and he was shopping at, I don't know. I don't know if it's Foot Locker or something, but he had the same hair. And I was like, oh man, look, we all end up in the same place, you know?
Yeah. There's no escaping it. Do you remember a band called Shorty?
Yeah, I do remember Shorty.
I saw their first show ever. And
okay.
The vocalist was singing through an effects pedal.
Yes.
I just remember you know how if you're playing guitar, you'll hit an effects pedal and maybe you'll miss and then you'll have to hit it again.
Yeah.
That happened to him while singing and looking down at the pedal.
Yeah.
It was middle of the day, it was an outdoor show.
Oh my God. We did so many outdoor, just sweating in a parking lot.
Yeah.
They would call it like a skate, like 3 kids would be skateboarding and they're like, it's a skate competition or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But we did a lot of those.
The Decepticons. Did you ever see them?
Oh, a lot of times. Were they like hardcore?
Yeah, super hardcore.
They also scared me. I saw the Decepticons a lot. And then what was the other one? 6 Cylinder. I don't know if they ever made it out of the hills.
Mm-hmm.
But they were up in like the foothills. But yeah, Decepticons I think we might have been on a bill with them at some point. Because they would overlap at that point. Ska bands and then and punk, and then it would bleed into hardcore a little bit. Yeah. But I would imagine you guys much more.
I mean, the bands we played with the most in Sacramento were Lestistics, Decepticons, and Lucky Strike. Like we played with those bands kind of just on a constant rotation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lucky Strike I saw them early before you were in the band. I only knew you were in the band because of this podcast, because I listened to this podcast.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, what? But I think I saw them before that. They were really good.
I only played like 6 shows with them, so nobody saw me play in that band.
I also want to say, just for the record, this doesn't have to be an hour of us just like shitting on Sacramento bands.
No, I loved Sacramento. I mean, I moved to Sacramento for a brief period of time because I thought all the bands were great. And literally as soon as I moved there, they all broke up.
When did you move there?
It would have been like 2000, 2001. Like I was there for 9/11.
Oh man. Yeah. Guess what? That's when we broke up too.
Oh, see? I moved there. Everybody broke up.
Yeah, we all went to college. That was 2000. We all graduated high school, and then it was just kind of the end of it for us.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't. So that must have been the end of the thing for SAC. I didn't realize, but they were. It was. I thought it was a really good scene growing up, and then I moved. I went to Miami for college, and I remember being like shocked that Miami just didn't have. I assumed like, oh, it's a bigger city. There'll be a bigger, better punk and ska scene here. And it was like not even close.
Yeah.
It was terrible. I remember I was there for only a couple weeks and I met some other kids who one of them had like a Bouncing Souls patch or something. And I'm like, oh, let's be friends. And then he was like, oh, he was from Miami. And he's like, we're going to go see like the best Miami ska band. I'm like, this is going to be awesome. And then we went and they're in your book, Aaron. Should I mention them or not? I know I've talked to you off air about them.
Let's hear.
Okay. They were called Blinking Underdogs. And that was like, I would say calling them an underdog was like an overstatement. It was the worst thing I'd ever seen. It was way worse than the worst band in Sacramento. And they were the best band in Miami.
Oof.
And I was like, what happened? I guess I didn't know that I was growing up in a good scene, is my point.
The weird thing, too, is that Florida has a lot of good scenes and good bands. Like, when we toured through Florida, we would play really incredible shows and play with really great bands. And I thought the same thing, too, like headed down towards Miami. I was like, okay, Miami's the big city.
Mm-hmm.
This show's going to go off. Like, all these other shows have been amazing. And it was like the worst show of the tour.
Yeah. It's a terrible live entertainment town.
Yeah.
Live music, live anything. But then I also learned in Aaron's book that the Blinking Underdogs guy, isn't he in like Star Wars or something?
Yeah, you're talking about Oscar Isaac.
Yeah. His band stunk. They were also just rock with horn. Like they were doing that whole rock with horns thing, which was, that was my least favorite. I didn't really like that genre that much. But anyway, back to Link 80. You guys were fantastic. You guys were, I would have sworn that I also didn't know much about like life and I was young and I would have sworn that you guys were all making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year playing in your band. I just thought if you had an album and then also if you had it on Asian Man Records, to me, that was like, oh, you made it. You guys you're just count down the days to retirement at that point, you know?
Yeah, that was the brokest I've ever been in my whole life.
Really?
Yeah. It was so poor. It was like being homeless, basically.
Yeah. And we were like 9 levels below that.
Adam's kind of talked about this before, too, that there was like kind of a tough, intimidating thing about Link 80 as a group. So you kind of picked up on the fact that they were maybe them or their audience was a bit like kind of intimidating.
I would say more the audience. Because I never met you guys, so I would go to shows. So it was hard to tell. I mean, like the music is awesome, fantastic. The horn, like the whole thing was great, and it just there was this idea that, like, if you went to see Hepcat, you're just hanging out, and if you went to see Linkady or Decepticons, maybe it was like that whole combo. It was like you just had to be. Especially just like because you'd be watching Linkady, you're like, this is awesome, great. And then Decepticons would come on, and all of a sudden a guy would like start doing karate in the middle of the mosh pit. And you're like, whoa, he's like swinging for my head. What are we doing? So there was just that sense a little bit. You just had to be aware of your surroundings, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. The funny thing with us, though, is that, since we had the ska into like the hardcore breakdowns, we'd have the kid who'd be skanking.
Yeah.
And then we'd hit the breakdown and they'd go straight from skanking into like the like windmills and like jump kicks.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. That's hilarious. It was really good though. I felt like you guys, and I don't know what your opinion was, but to me, Linkady was, I mean, I never saw you live earlier. So what I saw live was, I guess, the last incarnation of Linkady, but I thought it was like you guys were at your peak personally.
I mean, yeah, I feel like musically, when Nick was in the band, the focus was really on Nick. Like he had like all the like elements of like an amazing front person.
Yeah.
And the band was doing fine too, but like, I don't feel like the band was as engaged as Nick was. Like he was really going for it. And then when Nick passed away and we shuffled things around, I feel like everybody kind of went a little bit more all in. And also just the amount of touring that we did. Like everybody was playing their instruments so much on such a regular basis that everybody just got better.
That was the big difference between like our local shows and then seeing you guys, was how tight everything was.
Yeah.
Like the songs were just everything. Like it's not easy to take 5 or 6 instruments.
Yeah. And
then have them all like hit everything at the exact same time. And if you want evidence of that, you could listen to my band. From that
time. So that Capitol Garage show, was that a matinee? Was that a daytime show or was that a nighttime show?
No, it was at night. And the only reason I'm thinking it must have been winter is because I had a long sleeve shirt on. I remember having that long sleeve shirt on.
Right.
But yeah, it was really good. And I don't know. Did you guys ever see Lady Bird, the movie?
Oh yeah.
Yes. The movie. Mm-hmm.
I'm almost positive when, she works at that coffee shop. I'm almost positive they're depicting Capitol Garage.
Really?
It's right in that area, right near the high school. So she's 1 year younger than me, Greta Gerwig. She went to the girls' school. I went to the boys' school. I went to that school that's like depicted as the boys' school, the high school in the movie. And and if you notice throughout every time like the high school kids are hanging out at a party, there's ska music going on. Have you noticed that?
I completely missed that.
If they're in their car or they're they're drinking and someone's parents are away, it's literally always ska music, which was it's like someone made a big budget movie of my home movie of my high school. It's nuts. Down to the kids are all wearing khakis. None of the kids wear jeans. It's at that time, I didn't know a single kid who wore jeans.
Oh, hell no. Everybody wore Dickies.
Yeah. Dickies or something like that. Yeah. And she makes, that's in the movie. And then, there's this Mexican restaurant where she goes to after they graduate, which was the place everybody went after they graduated. And then she works at this coffee shop that has bands play at night. And that was the only place at that time that was doing that. And I'm like, I can tell she's talking about Capitol Garage.
What was the biggest show you ever saw at Capitol Garage?
Probably that. Or maybe, 7 Seconds or one of Kevin Seconds' bands used to play. He was living in downtown Sacramento, so they were around all the time.
He had the True Love coffee shop.
That's could be the other place she's depicting in the thing, but I think it feels more Capitol Garage-ish. But
yeah, I saw. Do you remember a band called The Faint?
I do not.
I remember that.
They were like a kind of like electro band, but like right when they were getting huge, they played at Capitol Garage, and the venue was way too small for them, and it was like completely oversold.
Oh yeah,
and so like every place that you could stand in that club was filled with people. And then they had their own light show.
Oh, wow.
And so they went around the club and they were like, we have to turn off all the lights for our light show. And so there was even like, they had the cooler with the like Coca-Cola branding on it. And it had they had to open it up, take the like faceplate off of it and unscrew the light bulb to turn it off.
That's nuts.
And then they could start their show.
That's and the people are probably like, we're just trying to sell mochas. Can you guys? Yeah. We're a coffee shop. I remember they'd always be trying to sell coffee while kids are like windmilling and stuff. It was the funniest place to see a show. But no, most of the shows I saw were, I mean, we could run through it quick because most people probably won't know, but Bojangles. And then there was a place called El Dorado Saloon that was hosting shows for a little bit in Carmichael. And then it bounced around. Like they'd have 9 months. This place would be like, for 9 months, they'd be the ska punk place. And then they'd get pissed off for some reason and be like, no more of these. And then we'd have to find a new place.
Big Shots was the one that I remember in Roseville.
Yeah, we played Big Shots. I remember playing there. And then for the bigger bands, it was the theater, the Crest.
In Defense of Ska, we'll be right back.
Have you ever felt overwhelmed trying to come up with another content idea? Maybe you have like 2 really good ideas that you're excited about, and then it's crickets. Hi, I'm Crystal Prophet, host of the Prophet Podcast, where we help you create content with confidence. Whether it's a podcast, a YouTube channel, or a repurposing strategy to make your life easier, we help you create content that you are proud to put out into the world. So make sure that you listen to the Prophet Podcast wherever you get your podcast.
Yeah, Crest Theater, and then there was also a Boardwalk in Orangevale, which I think is still there.
Who did you see at Crest?
I have a wild one. So the first ska show I think I ever saw, maybe not, but it was Real Big Fish at Crest. Opening for them was the Aquabats. And
dang,
it was the Aquabats with Travis Barker. And I was a drummer. And I remember I never heard of the Aquabats. They come on stage. I was like, this is crazy. It's like dudes in scuba gear playing ska music. And then I immediately was like, why does this scuba gear ska band have the best drummer I've ever seen in my life? Like, and they're opening. Like, who is this band? And then they blew it away. Like Real Big Fish was really good live, but they really blew them away. And then I bought all their stuff and became a fan. And then I want to say, like, I don't know, a year later, I don't know how long later, but he joined Blink-182 and he was like off to the races. But I remember just him being bizarrely better than anyone on stage at his instrument, like wildly better. And this is like a depiction of the ska scene in the 90s. I saw Real Big Fish at the Crest Theater, which seats like, I don't know, 1,500, maybe 2,000 people. Something like that. And then a year later, maybe I didn't go, but they played Arco Arena, which is where the Sacramento Kings played. It seated like 17,000 people. And then 6 months after that, they played a nightclub that stood like 125 people.
Wow.
That was like the up, down, like grow, fall off a cliff of that they were at the, and I went to the first one and the last one, and they were great. They were great every time I saw them, but I remember being confused. I was like, why are they playing this tiny venue in, I don't know where it was, Cameron Park, close to where I lived or something. But yeah, it was nuts. And I didn't know, I mean, this is skipping like way ahead, but I didn't know ska had really, I remember when your book came out, or when your book was about to come out, I started talking to my brother. We had both left the United States. I left in 2004 and came back in 2016, and he did about the same thing. And we both grew up going to ska shows, and he was like a huge Skank and Pickle fan. He got me into them. And we didn't technically know that ska had gone away. You're like, why did the books like, like ska, whatever, ska's not dead, or ska is dead, but it's back now. It's like, and we were like, wait, what happened? Like, we missed the whole thing. And then I came back in 2016 and I moved to New York City, and I went to see, I remember the Pie Tasters were playing, and I was like, oh, awesome. I'm going to go see the Pie Tasters. Just assuming that the Pie Tasters were as big as they were in like 1999 when I had seen them before. And there was like, I don't know, maybe 75 people there, and half of them were their family and me. And I was like, what? Did I just go into a time warp? Like, what happened? Why aren't they huge? What's going on? And then I read your book, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's this whole middle part I missed out on.
Yeah.
So yeah, but then I saw the Slackers shortly after that. And they can sell out anything in New York City, and they're awesome. They play every year at Christmas. So
they've maintained their audience, and I would say even have grown it in the sort of 2000s.
I agree. They're really the best. And I love the Pie Tasters, but I got the impression they were it's kind of like I could be wrong. You guys might know better, but it got the feeling they like kind of get back together once or twice a year to do this thing for fun. Like that was the feel of it.
I think they might be playing a little bit more now, but definitely in that post 90s era. I think they did have an album out in like the early 2000s, but then eventually there was a point where they were not active anymore.
Yeah. So yeah, I was in China for most of the fall.
For the fall.
What took you to China?
I graduated college. I was going to go for a year and teach English just to kind of see a different part of the world.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, I did that for a year. And then at the end of the year, decided to, my roommate from college in Miami, his grandfather had started this company on the East Coast called Mr. Softy Ice Cream Trucks. And it's like Dairy Queen on a truck. Like they play the music. Yeah. They have the song. There's a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode about the Mr. Softy truck. There's an Eddie Murphy bit. Like, you ain't got no ice cream. I don't know if you remember that one, but that's about the Mr. Softy man. So after a year in China, he and I decided to buy a franchise from his dad and open a Mr. Softy truck in China and just see what would happen.
How did that go?
It went bonkers. It was great. I ended up doing it for 10 years and built 10 trucks and opened 2 stores. And I was like the Mr. Softy guy, the ice cream guy for the city I was living in China. So yeah, it was quite the detour.
It all kind of like came down, right? Before you came back?
Yeah. So that was why I came back. So, halfway through that, I started doing stand-up comedy, which we get into later. But we were building and growing and growing and growing. And then, but we had to get a yearly permit from the government every year. There was no such thing as we were the first mobile vending truck in the country. There was no taco truck, there was no food trucks. We were the first one. So we had to kind of work with
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So I had all these meetings, I had to work with the local government to design the law that would regulate us, which is a pretty good deal if you can get it, to be writing your own law to regulate yourself. It's not a bad way to go. So they had no idea. They're like, so what we decided was that they said, well, you have to build a store, and then we'll say that your truck is like a delivery truck for the store. Like it could fit under a law that already existed that way. So so they would regulate a delivery truck, like a UPS truck or something. And so we did that, and the government was cool, and we got along well, and their kids loved ice cream. And so every once in a while you go and you hang out with, hey, let's have dinner, and here's some ice cream. And you schmooze. And I did that, and that was going great. And year after year after year after year. And then somewhere along the way, all the guys I had worked with retired, and these new young guys came in and were like, hey, how does that foreign guy have this permit to do all these ice cream trucks? And they were like, well, we give it to him. And then they're like, oh, well, why don't we just build trucks ourselves and then not give him the permits anymore? And they were like, that's a brilliant idea. So that's what happened. So they got their dumb cousin. There's always an idiot in the family. And you're like, listen, he's not meant for college. Or he's not meant for the career world, but we can give him an ice cream truck. And if he could just go sit on that and get out of our way, then he'll end up there, So all these government officials were building trucks that they didn't need permits for because they were the government, and then giving them to their cousins or brothers or nephews or uncles, and then parking them bumper to bumper with our trucks. And because we already knew where all the good spots were in town. So they just parked next to ours and basically just took our routes. And then eventually just pulled our permits away. So once they were all up and running, pulled our permits and made us illegal so we wouldn't compete with them. So... Jeez. Yeah, so I was like, I think it's probably about time to head out. So that was 2016, though. That's all it took over the course of 12 years. Did that.
Wow. So wait, the Mr. Softy trucks in China, do they have the same theme song?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we took it was Mr. Softy. Like, so we got the franchise and we took the exact music box from America and put them in our trucks in China. I found this factory that was building kind of like re-outfitting trucks in China. They were doing it a lot for like they take a shell and then turn it into an ambulance or like a radio tower type of thing, like an FBI thing, or sometimes a tank. And I got them I gave them the specs and they re-outfitted these shells and turned them into ice cream trucks. And they took me out there one day to go see the factory. And first we went out to lunch. And these guys, like all these like government, there's a government company, and these government guys, they love to just get hammered at like 11:30 in the morning on like Chinese moonshine. So I'm drinking with them. We're eating all this crazy food and we're blacked out drunk. And then they're like, all right, let's go back and see your trucks. But we go back to see my trucks, but they just let me into the back lot. And there's all these like super secret military vehicles that I should not be allowed to see. But we're all wasted. And they're like, hey, do you want to get on one of these tanks? Get in a tank. Go see the tank. And so I was like, all of a sudden got a private tour of all these like Chinese military secrets that if I was in any way sober, I could have, funneled them back to someone in America. But it was a wild life.
So Keith Lowell Jensen, Sacramento comedian, you brought him to China to do comedy. I assume you knew him from back in the day in Sacramento?
Yeah, I knew him. Well, not really. I knew Keith from stand-up. When I would come home and visit my parents, I would do stand-up in Sacramento, and he ran a show downtown at Luna Cafe in Sac.
Oh, okay.
And so I would just jump on his show and do 7 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that. And somewhere along the way, I started comedy out in China, and the town I was living in, I started an open mic. And it also turned out there was no other. That was the first one of its kind in the country. And then I ended up starting a tour, like turned that into a tour where we'd have these American comedians come out and we do maybe 6 nights around the country, and each night in a different city, doing a comedy show for the Chinese people who spoke English and the foreign expats and everybody who lived there. We'd like do a Tuesday in a city called Nanjing, and then a Wednesday in Hangzhou, and then Thursday in Suzhou, and Friday and Saturday night in Shanghai. And at our club, I ended up opening a comedy club as well in Shanghai. And Keith came out and did that whole tour.
Oh, yeah. So Keith Keith's a good friend, but he also was our first official guest on this podcast.
I listened. I know.
Actually, technically, so that's the only episode where we had a clip of somebody else calling our guest annoying before the episode. And that's technically Johnny Taylor is our first guest because we had that clip. Do you know Johnny?
Yeah. And I should also just say on the record, Keith is annoying. He's a good friend of mine, but I spent a lot of times in cars with Keith driving across California or different parts of China. Yeah. I know Johnny. Johnny's great too. I've kind of gotten to know the whole local. I didn't start my comedy career in Sacramento, but those two guys have ingratiated me into the scene, and people are really welcoming.
Johnny's a good friend too. And what's funny is he introduced me like a month ago to Melissa Villasenor because she likes ska.
Oh yeah.
And so he was opening for her at Punchline. And after the show, he invited her. He's like, "Oh, you want to meet her?" And so I talked to her, and and she was, she loves Catbite, and she showed me some ska memes on her phone.
Nice.
And then I was like, because Johnny hates ska, he hates it, and I was like, "Dude, why do all your comic friends love ska?" I was like, "Melissa, Keith." He's like, "Brian Posehn too." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Oh yeah, he likes." What? He was just so like, he was so disgusted.
What is he into? Like
he likes hair metal.
I was gonna say I was gonna guess death metal, but I knew it was one of them.
He likes the Father John Misty and all the like kind of sad stuff too. But his his like genre of music that he likes, like Hell or High Water, Ride or Die, his Ride or Die music.
Yeah.
Johnny taunts Keith about liking ska, and then Keith taunts Johnny about liking hair metal. That's their thing.
Yeah. Well, when we were I remember sitting in a cafe in the middle of China, and Keith and I realized that was the first time we realized that we had both kind of been in the Sacramento ska scene at the same time. And we knew like a bunch of the same people. And it's like, wait, what? Really? We know each other? Holy crap.
Yeah, that's so strange, isn't it?
Really nuts. Yeah. I should have guessed by the way he dressed that he always wears like a hat, like a bowler hat. And yeah.
I don't know if we can call it a bowler hat.
What's the term? What are those hats called?
Oh, I don't know. It's not a fedora either. It's a nice hat. It's a good hat.
It's a good hat. I'm not saying it's a bad hat. No, listen, I'm a ska person. I like ska.
Yeah.
But I think there's a connection between ska and comedy. I mean, it helped growing up in a ska band for sure helped me write later on with comedy. Writing music, writing songs helped with writing jokes. Like definitely, because there's a rhythm to comedy that exists that you might not necessarily know you're feeling, but you're feeling. If you're sitting in a comedy club watching a stand-up, there's a hit and a hit and a hit and a hit. And it starts to like, and then there's a pause and then a big hit. And whether I think having that background gives you this inherent ability or kind of like, when you're hitting the right, when a joke's working, when the rhythm's on based off of just doing it, writing songs your whole life. And clearly it's not like required to have played in a ska band, but it doesn't hurt, as you can tell.
It's required.
I think it's required, but I was just trying to be nice. Yeah. I was trying to be nice.
So when did you start your band? That was like, how old were you?
I think 12 maybe or 13. Wow. But the first band was it was all the same people throughout the different iterations of the band, but we initially started out with a different name. I don't even remember what it was, but we were trying to be Weezer pretty much. 93, 94, somewhere in that range. And then I think 95 switched. We all got into ska at the same time, or maybe I got more into it than other people, but kind of pushed them into it. And we became a ska. And then we started looking for horn players and became a ska band. And went through really 2000, and then and then we got back together after freshman year of college. We all came home and played for the summer in 2001. But yeah, it was kind of like the thing to do. There was a lot of bands. I remember like half the high school I went to being in bands. It felt like there was a ton of bands, and I don't think there was any other ska bands at our school, but it just felt like ska was very normal. I never remember having to explain to anybody, like until I went to college in Miami. Growing up, I never had to explain to anybody like, what is ska? That was never, everyone just kind of knew. I think maybe because Warped Tour would come through Tahoe every year and everybody would go up there for 4th of July and it was exposing us. I remember the Specials played at Warped Tour one of the years and you were just kind of exposed to it. It was just kind of, and it was on the radio at that point with the Boss Tones and Blink-182, I mean, not Blink-182, Real Big Fish and Steve Ferris. Was that your experience growing up? You guys are a few years older than me, but not a lot.
Yeah, it's a little different. We got into ska. As me in particular, I got into ska from Skank and Pickle in like 92. Yeah. So it was like an underground music when I got into it. And then I kind of watched it go into being a mainstream genre, which was a weird experience.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if ska didn't need to be, if people weren't asking what ska when we were growing up, mostly because they didn't want to look like they didn't know things. So they would just go, oh, that's ska. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I remember particularly being in junior high. So I must have been like 12 or 13. And I was really into Skank and Pickle. And my brother had got me into him. And then there was this other kid who was more like a tough kind of punk guy. And he was and he had like a jacket. I wanted like a jean jacket, but with patches all over it. And he was really into Operation Ivy. And I remember he didn't know who Skank and Pickle was, and I didn't know who Operation Ivy was. And we kind of like inherently didn't really like each other. I think he didn't like me. He thought he thought I was weak and a wimp. And he just thought ska was lame. And then one day, the same week, somebody must have given him a Skank and Pickle album. And somehow I discovered Operation Ivy, and we were both like, oh, wait, I like you. You like my band? I like that band. You like that band? And then we were friends. And then he ended up playing in my band for a while later on. Played bass. And we're still friends to this day. He plays in a band in LA called Citizen, I think, which is like kind of like a Southern California Sublime-ish type group. Guy Kevin Brown. But yeah, I remember that. It was also, well, we were young, but it was also just new. And over the top of everything was grunge in the early 90s, early mid 90s.
Grunge, and then like alternative, quote unquote, alternative rock, like Weezer, and then like
yes,
the other bands. To me, my memory of like grunge to like the Pearl Jam to Weezer, it seemed like really fast. Like
agreed.
But you know, it's a long time ago. That's kind of how I remember. Like 1 minute radio is dominated by Pearl Jam and Nirvana, and then all of a sudden it's dominated by Weezer. Not like so different musically. I mean, people might argue with me saying that. I just mean in the sense that it's just catchy rock music, you know, different flavors of it.
I agree. It's all, well, what was Frank Black's band? What were they called again? The Pixies.
The Pixies? Yeah.
I find those bands as all different like versions. They took different avenues. They listened to the Pixies and took it a different way. I don't know. That's I'm sure that's very controversial to say, but that's how I feel. You can hear the Pixies in all of it.
You know what? Nate Albert, the guitarist for the Boss Tones, told me that Pixies were a big influence on him and his decision to go the ska verse punk chorus formula that they invented that sort of became the style for 90s ska bands.
Wow.
So you said more truth than you realized.
Do you know what else? You're not the only person in this interview who's interviewed Nate Albert.
Whoa.
I talked to him in Miami. I was writing for the school paper, and he had just left the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones to start whatever his next band was that sounded Pixies-ish, actually. And I remember going to see them and then hanging out with him and doing an interview with him. He was a good guy.
Did you interview other ska bands? I saw like an interview with some ska musician that said from like the 2000s, and it said Turner Sparks. And I was like, I assumed that wasn't you, but that must have been you.
It must have been. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I wrote it was probably for my school paper. I don't know how, did you just Google that? You Google my name and found it?
I Googled your name. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that was probably me. I don't know of any other Turner Sparks. If you find them, I got to fight them. So.
Yeah. And you have to cut off his head and absorb his power.
Yeah, exactly.
So your new album is called Double Happiness. So
yes.
You said it has 4 meanings. One of them obviously is the name of the Slow Gherkin album, but what's the other 3 meanings?
So Double Happiness is, my wife's Chinese, and Double Happiness is I met when we were living over there, and it's the characters, the Chinese characters that they hang on your door when you get married. So it's like a wedding. It's like a wish for a marriage, like a beautiful marriage, double happiness. Like it's 2 people coming together, right? So it's this new record, which is it'll be on YouTube. It might, by the time you hear this, it might be out. You could check, but it'll be on YouTube, and it's also come out. You can download it on iTunes and all that stuff. And if you want it signed, I can go to turnersparks.com. I can sign it and send it to you. But it's so this is it's a show. It's an hour, whatever it is, about my marriage for the most part. So that's one meaning. The second meaning is it's my second record. It's the second thing I've done. So like, hey, it's a double. It's the number 2. Hey, here you get happy again. Listen to the new one, you know? And then the third meaning is that it's an hour or 45 minutes, whatever it is. It's an hour of me complaining. So it's just ironic, you know, it's tongue in cheek.
Okay.
It's happiness. And then the fourth meaning is it's
the most important one.
Yeah. It's a Slow Gherkin album. And I thought, why not rip off a ska band? No. I thought it was a cool idea. Just name it after that. And then maybe people, I don't know, like it'll show up next to it in places when you search online. And then I kind of thought like, well, I should name everything I do from now on, all my future hours. I'm starting to work on the next one now I should name them after albums that were around when I was young, and punk bands, ska bands, whatever. Here's my question to you. Is that am I ripping these bands off, or is that like an homage? It's supposed to be an homage, but I don't know how it would be taken.
I think it's a good homage. Like, because you're in a different format, I think it's cool. Like, you're a comedian using an album.
Okay.
If you were another band, maybe it would depend.
Yeah.
But I like it where you're like crossing over a different art form.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's supposed to be like an Easter egg.
Adam, what's your take?
I mean, Aaron and I, when we have a band called Nar Boots. The very first thing that we put out was called we put out an EP called Maybe I'll Catch Fire.
I totally forgot about that.
Did you really?
We did.
Oh, I thought you were joking.
No. Yeah, the first 3 songs we put out, we titled it Maybe I'll Catch Fire, and then on the front of it, I put a picture of a drawing of a giant bear trap. I just thought it was funny, I think doing it across like being a comedian and also being full aware that like there's a Slow Gherkin album called that, and that you like Slow Gherkin.
Yeah,
like that's a great callback, and I think it just like opens up the conversation of like, wait, do you know there's a ska band? And then you go, yeah, I know. Good.
Okay, that's the point. Yeah, I'm not going to name it like Tragic Kingdom or something, you know?
Right.
I'm going with like, I think that like Grow Up is one of my favorite Queers albums. That might be the new one. But it's the Queers Grow Up, so it might be Turner Sparks Grows Up with a question mark. I don't really know.
It'd be hilarious if you called your new album Sublime Self-Titled.
The Blue Album.
Joyce Manor, like their new record is called 40 Ounces to Fresno. So that's a genius album title.
Yeah.
Well, there's a band called Hot Water Music, which is a Bukowski book.
Right.
So you can cross over. Okay.
So Slow Gherkin Double Happiness, was this a favorite album? Here's the rub.
Here's the issue. I do like Slow Gherkin, but I'm sure I for sure listened to the album growing up, but it wasn't like top album ever, but it was just, I mean, I should just say yes. Can we take that again? And I just say yes. I do. I like the band, but I'm like, I want it fit. It was one of those that I realized it fit. And then I'm like, it's also named after that thing, but I like that band, but I wouldn't, I don't know. Is that a good answer? That's a bad answer.
No, I think that's fine. I think I appreciate Gherkin more now than I did back in the day.
I got to get back into him is what I'm trying to say.
I mean, they just put out our intro music and outro music is both from their most recent recording, and they're both solid songs. Like really, really, probably the best stuff they've ever done.
Oh, good. Well, then I do like them because I love what you guys play. Maybe, yeah. You know what? That might actually be it. Aaron, remember I asked you, I don't know, 6 months or a year ago, like, hey, what are those songs on your intro and outro? And you sent me those, and that's probably why it clicked back into my head. So good.
Yeah. So basically, I'm the reason why this album is called Double Happiness.
Boom. All right, there we go. It's
all ska circles back to Aaron.
Yes.
You should check out Gherkin's second album, Shed Some Skin. I don't know if you listened to that back in the day, but that's I think their best album.
Now that might be the name of that would be over the top if I just did it again.
Shed Some Skin.
I only name my records after Slow Gherkin albums.
Or we should go with Maybe I'll Catch Fire.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Let's do that one.
Can I ask you a question, Aaron?
Yeah.
Are you responsible for the narrative that ska's back?
I don't know that I'm responsible for that. I think there's a couple factors happening at the same time. One of them is that there was like new bands that were gaining interest, and that was happening around the same time as my book was happening. And then I think there was more like journalists taking an interest in what was happening, and my book sort of became part of that.
Your book killed it.
I'd say the biggest part of it is that there are a bunch of like new bands, or not new, but like bands that are not the old legacy bands that are doing well. And then Aaron wrote a book that talks about the 90s period and talks about, the two-tone period and everything that came before, but also knows what's happening now. Like if Aaron had written it from the perspective of that was the 90s and that's it, and now we're all done, I think it would be different. But I definitely think the book, is definitely a puzzle piece in there.
Yeah, and it's weird because my book became a component for a lot of these articles about ska being back. And it's funny because my book is never been about ska is back. But I was like I was an interviewee for many of those articles.
Yes.
So I became like some unintended voice for that. And I have like my own feelings about it are way too complicated to try to explain, like, in these narratives.
Yeah.
So
it's great. I saw the Interrupters a couple weeks ago in New York. And as you're saying, it was the first non-legacy band, I guess if that's the term, that I'd ska band or ska punk, whatever, that I'd seen in a long time. And it was so good. It was so like refreshing. Like, and the other, as you said, they're not new. They've been around for probably 10 years, right?
yeah, I think so.
But it took that because the genre was not, it's like so far away from the, like, I guess the average person. It took that long to kind of, they've been doing well for a while. They were on Jimmy Kimmel. I know we're recording this in advance. They were on Jimmy Kimmel last night as we record this. But imagine seeing Rancid 10 years after they came out and being like, this is a new band,
Right.
It's just a different time now, I guess, is what I'm saying. But they were so awesome. They were great.
I saw you perform comedy in Sacramento at the Punchline. What was that like? I don't think it was a year ago, but it was something around that.
It was last winter 2021.
Winter 2021.
Yeah.
You told me, we hung out and had coffee before, and you told me that, the comedy scene in New York has gotten to this point where there's like a lot of political comedians that are like on the left, and there's a lot of political comedians on the right. And there's not a ton of people who are just comedians. Just like, hey, I'm here to tell jokes.
Yeah.
Could you speak on that? Because I find that really fascinating.
Sure. Yeah. I guess I'm a little old school, but I prefer my comedians to be funny.
Yeah.
And now it's like everybody has like has some big time message on whether it's you need to, like, telling you how to vote or like to take a vaccine or not take a vaccine. And like it's serious. It's like this comedy has become this serious business. And I think it also might just, and there's literal like a Proud Boy branch of comedy in New York City. There's comedians in New York City who were storming the Capitol on January 6th. Like, it's madness.
Oh my God, that is so bizarre.
And it's so bizarre. It's because what happened was it's hard. Like as playing in a band, it's hard to make a living as a comedian. It's hard to make a living as a musician. And I think somewhere along the way, and when Trump kind of came in, everybody found this shortcut, which is like, wait a second, if I'm not very good at comedy, but if I just say that the left is crazy and cancel culture is blah, the worst, and we got to storm the Capitol, then I can get a podcast base together, And it worked. These people, they're never going to be on TV, but they don't care. They have like 100,000 people listen to their podcast because they're reaffirming the fact. And especially like there's this female comic, I won't name her, so I don't want to give her any publicity, but that's like a real good angle because it's mostly white guys, right? But if you can be the female comic who's like, you white guy, you guys are crazy, but I agree too. And then like the listeners, the Proud Boy listeners can be like, see, it's not just dudes, like women. They think it's fine. She said she laughed, So that's like a whole world. And then there is another world, which is like you're in a bookstore in Brooklyn and you're railing against the patriarchy, and the worst thing on earth is the men or whatever it might be. And then that's a whole community too. And I don't find either side, like there's not a lot of jokes on either side. It's a lot of statements and people clapping and it's like a rally, And but I say that I do think that just like online and Twitter and everything, those are kind of the loud minorities. on each side. Like the majority of people are doing comedy and telling jokes and really just, I guess the hardest thing to do in art is find yourself. Find out why you're on stage. What's the point? What are you trying to tell people? Why am I telling jokes? And it can't be because I want to be funny. It's because, like, what's the message? So for me, it really goes back to growing up in the ska and punk scene. And it's a message of like unity. There's this whole divided world out there, if I can get serious for a second. But there's so much we have in common. So my first record that I put out in 2019, I just got back to America, and it was the commonalities. It was an hour about the commonalities I saw in Americans. Hey, that we all do. Americans do this. No one was saying Americans are like this. People were saying Republicans are like this, and Democrats are like this, or like black people are like this, and white people are like this. But I was looking at it from this outsider perspective. So I was saying Americans do this. These are the things we all are like, and trying to unify people through the comedy. And then the second one is about my marriage, which is an interracial, intercultural marriage. And I talk about my wife for a half hour before even mentioning she's Chinese, because no one's picturing that in their mind, that my wife is going to be a Chinese person. So it's a surprise. And what it's telling you underneath is that, oh, wow, like that's a typical relationship, even if that is from people from two different countries, especially countries that are currently at odds with each other. But I didn't even realize they were from that because it was so normal. Like the things they were going through were so normal. And so now I'm trying to do it with that, with different cultures. But anyway, I think that's the hardest thing to do for any artist, is to find what you're trying to say. And so it's easier just to be like, well, I'll just say that we need to storm the Capitol. And then if 100,000 people are like, I will subscribe to that podcast. Like, you don't care. These people don't care who they are. They're like, listen, like Magic Spoon is paying for ad hits. So I don't, you know what I mean? I'm getting $1,000 per ad I read. So I think people are trying to find a shortcut.
Yeah.
And that might be what it is. I don't know if you guys see this in music, if there's any similarity there.
I know that, well, I mean, just to say, like, as a person that appreciates comedy, like, I think, go back to Keith. Mm-hmm. Keith's a person, he's been doing it for a really long time. He has a strong point of view that is very politically left.
Yeah.
But he always puts comedy first. And
yes,
he makes sometimes points of view that might make people uncomfortable, but he does it in a way, he's not trying to alienate people. He's trying to deliver his message in a way that's funny. And there's a lot of craft that goes into that. And it comes through doing it for like years and years and years and years.
And Keith and I tour together a ton. Anytime I'm in the area in California, he and I work together because of that exact reason. Because he puts the comedy first, and he has, it takes a lot of charm, which he has, to be able to go up to do what he does in front of people who might disagree with him, but then they ultimately like him because the jokes are so good. Mm-hmm. So that's the good side of that. So
on one hand, comedy can be this thing where you can almost like open people up to a message by being funny. That's like the skill of it. The part that you're talking about is like, well, let's just say the thing that certain people want to hear, and let's just jump to that, and then we'll just get those people, and we'll piss off the other people.
Yeah. It's that idea of, I mean, it's kind of true. Like nowadays, you don't have to play to. I guess you never really did have to play to everybody, but you for sure don't have to now, because the radio doesn't matter. I mean, the music too. Like the radio doesn't matter, and it's so you get a small audience. You want to. I forget the term, but you know what I mean? Like if you get a hyper focused small audience, that's good. But an easy way to do that is just to latch on to whatever the current trend thing is.
Yeah.
And go for it. So I guess I see that, and whatever, good for them. But, God bless them. I got into comedy to tell jokes. My heroes are like Norm Macdonald is my hero for comedy. Because it's always about the joke. It's always like landing. The joke is for sure. And you never even know. I've followed him for 25 years and never knew what his political leanings were, because it wasn't part of what he was doing. Now, I agree with you what you're saying about Keith. Like people can do it successfully, and Jon Stewart for sure did it successfully. But just like the Deftones,
There's the
there's the callback when there's a lot of people who either want to be the next Jon Stewart or like even worse want to be the next Tucker Carlson.
So another comedian that you're friends with is Ian Fidance, right?
Yeah,
he's been a guest on this show. He's a adamant ska lover.
Yes, he's great.
When did you meet him?
I met him years ago, but didn't really get to know him until not long ago. I would say middle of the pandemic. We were doing like outdoor shows in the parks and rooftops and all that stuff together. And he was talking to somebody. I think it was like he was going to see H2O or something like that. And it was like, I never hear people mention bands like that. Just the average person in the back room at a comedy club, and I was just like, my ears perked up. I'm like, wait, you like H2O? And then he's like, yeah. And then we started talking, and then started talking to me, and then somehow just got to ska pretty quickly. And then we realized we kind of grew up similarly on separate coasts, listening to all the same stuff. And that's kind of like whenever I see him, which is bouncing around the clubs every once in a while, once a month or something, we're on the same show. Yeah, he's great. He's hilarious too.
Oh yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about your podcast, Lost in America.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I understand it, you interview comedians from all over the world.
Yes.
And it kind of gives you a glimpse into the social, political dynamics of these countries, right?
Yeah, that's it exactly. I kind of felt like, I guess, piggybacking on what we were just talking about, there was enough people talking about politics in America, but no one is kind of learning, at least here. It doesn't feel like there's enough people that are giving us outlets to learn about the rest of the world. And through touring comedy, I've toured a bunch, 20 countries or something like that, met comedians from around the world. There's comedy scenes everywhere. And so what we decided to do was every week, pick a topic of some news topic that's going on somewhere else in the world. Like, so there's the Ukraine war, obviously, but for example, they just had a coup in Sri Lanka like last week as of recording time. And so the question is like, why the hell do they have a coup in Sri Lanka? So we find a comedian who's from Sri Lanka, get him on the podcast. He explains the whole story to us. So you're getting your global news from a comedian who lives in the country and is from the country.
Yeah.
And when it's comedians talking to comedians, it's also it's going to be told in an entertaining way because and they're also pretty honest. I feel like it's like unfiltered. Like, all right, well, this guy sucks. That guy, this family's been in power for 50 years, whatever it might be. And so we've been doing that for a couple of years, and we actually just decided to turn it into a TV show that we financed ourselves, and we're going to be shopping probably as this is out right now. But we just went to El Salvador to do an episode in person. So El Salvador a year ago made Bitcoin their currency, like their legal tender in the country is Bitcoin.
Wow.
So my co-host and I flew to El Salvador and met with 3 different comedians and their families and went on these little adventures with each comedian, and then met with a couple different government officials and this Bitcoin millionaire guy who lives there, all basically trying to understand what's it like to live in a country where Bitcoin's your currency. How does it even work? If you're a small business owner, went to this restaurant, hung out with them, like how do you accept currency? How do you accept money in a currency that's fluctuating all the time, and then at the end did a stand-up comedy show with those comics at their local club that we filmed. And we were all doing material about the adventures we went on earlier in the week, which again would be the same thing in the sense of just trying to show it's another unity thing that, hey, look, we're all comics. We all, no matter where you go in the world, we all have this thing in common. And here you're getting a glimpse into the lives of these average families in this country while learning about a topic.
I think that's interesting because I find that it's hard to get information about what's happening around the world here that's not through a lens of, American talking heads, whether it be
agreed
somebody who's on Fox News or somebody who's on the left side, and it feels like our political, two-party system seems to filter the what's happening in other countries, and I know in my heart that it's way more complicated than that, but it's not presented to me like it's complicated.
Agreed. Yeah. And it was so much when we started it, we were just, even if it was a big story, you'd kind of get a headline and then it would immediately be blown off the headline because Trump got 2 scoops of ice cream instead of 1 at the White House. And that was like, oh my God. Or like Biden the other day was trying to say he had COVID and accidentally said cancer. And then, oh my God, that's breaking news. Meanwhile, there's a war going on in some other country.
Yeah.
But we don't care anymore because like Biden's sunglasses are crazy, and so we just try. Exactly. We want to bypass that whole thing. And as you said, the lens. So even the Ukraine war, we're learning about it through either the left or a lens of American politics.
Yeah.
Where there's real people being affected and there's real things going on. And Bitcoin was totally the same. We found out that anything we had read, 60 Minutes went down to El Salvador and did a Bitcoin story 3 months ago. And I thought 60 Minutes would do pretty good journalism. It turns out like, no, it was a mat. Like I watched their thing. They just interview the Americans who were living there, first of all, or the government, like the American expats who were all invested in Bitcoin. And these people are like, it's great. Everybody here uses Bitcoin. It's this utopia that we're all living and it's the future and things are happening. And the government's saying the same thing because they're invested in Bitcoin. We went down there without an agenda. We really just wanted to learn. We got down there we tried like 10 different places. No one even accepted Bitcoin.
Wow.
All these local businesses were like, yeah, are you nuts? Like, no, we're not. I was like, how do you accept Bitcoin when it's fluctuating so much? How do you run a business off that? They're like, we just don't take it. Like, yeah, the law says we have to, but screw that. I'm not. It would put me out of business. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's what I thought. But then I saw 60 Minutes and they said you take it. They're like, no, they're wrong. They're just interviewing Americans who are Bitcoin millionaires who are trying to get everyone to buy Bitcoin. But then when we also met the Bitcoin millionaire when we were there, and he was like feeding us this information that was just not on par with the reality we were living, And, but I think he was just so used to being able to tell people stuff and they're in America and they're not really looking into it,
And they don't know enough about Bitcoin to really challenge him, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And they're not going to come down there and spend a week going to shops and restaurants and trying to use it over and over again. And even there's this town called Bitcoin Beach, which is known as the only currency they use there, they accept there is Bitcoin. So the country's also on US dollars. But in certain, like in Bitcoin Beach, they say they only take, you better get your Bitcoin ready. They only take Bitcoin. We went there. No one would take our Bitcoin. One lady saw us walking down the street and we had cameras. And when she saw us coming up to her, she ran away because she knew we were going to be asking about Bitcoin. She didn't want to be on camera not accepting it. So she just closed her shop real quick as we're coming. It was wild.
That is such a trip. Yeah.
Anyway, Lost in America is the show. We're still doing the podcast. We're trying to do both.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
Thanks, man.
So you still have all your Bitcoin?
No. Oh, here's the craziest part. We couldn't even take it out. So they're like, yeah, there's these Bitcoin ATMs, and you go to them, and once you get into the country, we'll just take you to the ATM. You can transfer your money into Bitcoin, get our little wallet, like our app, and then you can use Bitcoin around town. And the ATM didn't work because we didn't have like a local ID card. So you have to be a local to use it, which means all these Americans on 60 Minutes saying like, this is great. They're all lying. Like, unless they had some other system that we couldn't figure out, but we tried for the whole week and couldn't get Bitcoin out. So it's going to make for a good show, but it was a failed experiment.
Circling back to ska, shall we?
Please do.
We talked about Lesdistics a little bit, but can you give us a little bit more of a tactile explanation? Describe Lesdistics. Am I saying it right? Lesdistics?
Lesdistics?
Lesdistics.
Yeah.
Describe a Lesdistics show.
Amazing. They were great. I heard Steve on this show, and I got to say, he really undersold them. He was like, yeah, that was my band I used to be in. But, I was like, what are you talking about? The band was awesome. They had this album called Two for the Road, which was their first one. It's so good. I don't know. Am I crazy? I don't know if what you guys think.
They were great live.
Yeah.
Have you listened to that album recently?
No. It was tough.
Yeah, they were great. They were great live.
It's tough. It's a tough listen.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe. Yeah. I haven't heard it recently, but they were really good live. It was really fast. Like you didn't necessarily know what was going on, right?
Yeah.
Meaning it was just a ton of sound coming at you. But Mikey, the bass player, Mikey Adelano, I remember him was just like shredding on bass. And Jimmer, the singer, was just really like, it was the fastest. It was super fast. It was just a lot of fun. It was like a giant party every time they played. That's kind of what I remember. They would dress up a lot. Like sometimes they would all have masks on.
Yeah. And
costumes and stuff. And it was just kind of nuts. That's my main memory of them. Am I hitting that in the head?
Oh, definitely. And also, I mean, they also sound wise, they were grabbing some of like the best parts of like what was happening with, I guess, quote unquote, new metal, like some of like the more dissonant, like weird single note guitar things.
Yeah.
They would layer that in and then have like hardcore parts, and they'd play like thrash metal all mixed in with ska.
Yeah.
It was all really good. But the main problem with that record is it's not, I mean, a lot of stuff from that era is just not recorded well. And then lyrically, those albums are a little like, oh, like,
oh, are they?
There's some stuff that's like a little bit like, oh gosh, like, but, I mean, whatever. It's of a time period. I'm not trying to crap on it too much. I mean, I think the stuff they had on the split 7-inch with us, I haven't listened to that in a few years, so I can't say for sure, but I feel like that was the best stuff they put out.
I mean, the only good news about what I would imagine with the lyrics back then is he was speaking so fast.
Right.
It was probably hard to decipher. But I remember there was like they had a bunch of clips from movies. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Like every song would begin and end with the move, like I bet I know what you're talking about now, because it was a lot of Dolomite, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I just remember it being fun. I don't remember really I know I get what you're talking about now with the lyrics. I could see that being a thing, but I was never so deep into the lyrics. Oh, I was a member of Anti-Racist Action. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Is that still a thing?
I haven't heard of it being a thing in a while. The last interaction I had with them was like, we did this Link 80 tour that was only in Texas.
Okay.
And it was like the worst tour we ever did. And it was supposed to be sponsored by ARA.
Yeah.
And so we were expecting they were going to have like, tables at all the shows and literature, and none of that materialized. The tour was like horribly routed. It was like venues were getting changed every 2 seconds. And that was the last interaction I had with any sort of ARA group.
That checks out with my experience. So my story was, I think it was maybe my senior year of high school. I was 17, but I was still, I looked like I was 10. I'm a young looking guy anyway, but I remember I was still getting into Sierra at Tahoe to go skiing for the 12 and under price, which was $5. I was a senior in high school. And I was at some concert at the Crest Theater, and they had their booth, the Anti-Racist Action booth. And I went up and started talking to him. And I was like, yeah, how do I get involved? And they were like, oh, just sign your name and your phone number here, and we'll get in touch, whatever, maybe email. And so I did that. And then they called me or emailed me 2 weeks later. And the guy was like, hey, so thanks for signing up. This chapter is based in the Bay Area, but we're actually looking for someone in Sacramento. Do you want to you could be the head of it. And I was like, what? Okay. What? And they were like, yeah, give us your address. We'll mail you t-shirts, which as far as I knew, I don't know what else being the head of it meant, except they were mailing me t-shirts. And so then all these t-shirts showed up with like Hitler blowing his head off and stuff. And my parents were like, what's going on here? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I guess I'm in this group now. And so they're like, yeah, just take the t-shirts to the shows. You pick the shows and sell t-shirts. It was very disorganized. And then they're like, we're having a chapter meeting if you want to come to the chapter meeting. So I was like, yeah, sure. So I go, and it was in, I don't know, it was like Merced or Manteca or like, I don't know, wherever the water slides were. I think it was there.
Yeah, Manteca.
And it was in like maybe a public library, and there were 7 people and me, and they were sitting around, and it wasn't like the toughest looking bunch, you know, but they were sitting around talking about, they had a list of all of the KKK rallies were going to be coming up, and that we were all going to go there and fight them. And I was like, oh, okay, I this is good, but I might be in over my head. I just signed up on a list like a week ago, and now I'm here. So, and then I got interviewed by the local, like I want to say News and Review or something in Sacramento, like the listings magazine. And the guy was like, you're the head of ARA. I want to come meet with you. I'm like, sure. And then this is all over the course of like a week. And then we meet at this coffee shop in Folsom. And he was like, I was like, hi, I'm Turner. He's like, what? You're Turner? I look 10, remember? Yeah. He's an adult. He's like, yeah. I was like, yeah. And he goes, you're the head of anti-racist action in Sacramento? I was like, I don't know, I guess. And he goes, all right, well, you guys are known. He starts asking me questions. Like all of a sudden I'm the spokesman. He's like, you're known for some very violent acts. And it's in the name of anti-racism. So that's good, but it's a pro-violence organization. How do you square that with your morals or whatever? And I was like, we're known, what? We're known for violent acts? Like, I didn't know anything, and then I think I called the guy and I was like, hey man, I'm in, but like, I don't think I should be the head of this. Can I return the shirts? And I mailed the shirts back to him. And then I think that was roughly it. But, it was, so I'm sure the people you were dealing with in Texas were just people like me. Yeah. They're like, now you're in charge. Like, what? It's very disorganized.
Let's just go through the list of some other bands that we didn't discuss that you were a fan of from back in the day. Any come up?
Yeah. I mean, I saw Hepcat a number of times live. I saw Let's Go Bowling. I was fans of all these bands. I saw the Pie Tasters open. I saw one show that I'm pretty sure, I think it was Swinging Utters and then Pie Tasters and then Mighty Mighty Boss Tones at the El Dorado Saloon, which is like a club.
Wow.
This is all maybe like 96. I remember they all saying it was their first California tour from what I remember. Or not Swinging Utters. They were from California. And then a couple months later, or maybe a year later, whatever it was, Pie Tasters came back and had Bouncing Souls open for them, and at the same place. And then I saw a ton of local bands. I saw Filibuster a bunch, and I just remember being surprised when I left Sacramento that everybody wasn't into local music in their scene. Like I remember going to college and being like to the other people, like, "What are your favorite bands?" And these are like 18-year-old kids, and they're like, "Oh, the Allman Brothers," And I'm like, "What?" I thought they were going to name like a local. I'm like, you're from Philly. What about like Dead Milkmen? And they're like, I've never heard of Dead Milkmen. I'm like, what's going on? I just assumed everybody in Philly loved the Dead Milkmen. I didn't know that these bands were not all giant famous bands. That was kind of the world I was living in.
Unlike Adam and Link 80, these bands were not rich.
They weren't all, Link, yeah. The Dead Milkmen don't live in mansions outside of Philadelphia, apparently. Maybe they do, but Punk Rock Girl did well. But yeah, the Queers, Giant Into the Queers, Screech and Weasel. I mean, that was like the kind of punk side. And ska was everybody. It was a lot of the New York stuff. That was a lot of my draw. I kind of always wanted to live in New York. All the Moon Records, the Toasters. Something about the more traditional sound versus like Southern. I like Southern California ska, But I think I got into that first and then went a little deeper and found like the two-tone stuff, which like the Toasters kind of brought to New York, I guess. Right.
Yeah.
And I remember I was going to shows like once a week and a lot of times by myself. I remember it was just comfortable. I mean, I remember I was that kid. My parents would drop me off at Big Shots or Eldorado Saloon and then come pick me back up at like 11 or whenever it ended. And I remember just like the first time stinking like weed. And my parents were like, "Are you high?" And I'm like, "No, I wasn't high." I'm like, "No, I'm not high. Just everyone around me is smoking weed the whole time." They're like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then they're like, "Oh, okay."
Go ahead and go back to that place.
Yeah. And then it was just known that I was going to smell like weed every time I came out. But they didn't, I guess I don't know. They didn't mind.
Do you remember that feeling, Aaron, going to shows and like coming out just covered in the smell of like spilled beer and cigarettes and weed?
the smell of cloves.
Yeah. Ugh.
It was, remember, I guess you could smoke inside then because
smoke inside, which was crazy when I think about now. If people could smoke inside clubs now, that would definitely deter me from going to shows.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
there was always there would be like 250 people smoking and then maybe 2 people smoking cloves, and those cloves overrode every single cigarette. You're like, oh yeah, there's a guy smoking cloves on the other side of this club.
I will say the amount of all ages, looking back, I just took for granted that all these all ages shows existed. But then I read your book, and it's like Skeng and Pickle kind of like pioneered that whole thing, right?
It definitely helped. Yeah, they definitely helped.
Yeah.
It's so cool because I could see, as an adult, I could see a bar owner being like, I don't want all these 15-year-old kids coming to my bar, But I guess they figured it was an avenue they could make enough money to make it work.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you own a venue and you want to have stuff happening, 4 to 5 days a week, you have to diversify. So maybe you have bar bands that you're selling a lot of alcohol. Then maybe you have some nights where it's a bunch of kids and you're not selling as much, but you're selling good tickets. So I think it's probably about diversifying.
They were all packed. These shows were all packed. Sacramento, we always would get the weekday because they'd go to the Bay Area for the weekend.
Yeah.
So it was always like a Wednesday or Thursday night. But I guess my parents didn't care. It was throughout high school. I mean, for like 14 to 18, I was doing it.
Yeah.
All the time. And then we were playing at dance. Did you guys play like any like high school dances? Was it anything like that for your bands?
No, I never did. I remember Flat Planet playing on the platform behind the theater.
Yeah, we played. That was like a lunch show.
We did a lot of lunch, a couple dance. It was schools would have battle of the bands. Like I said, there'd be like 10 bands at every school. It was just this. It was odd. I mean, like it was very normal at the time, but then
Sure.
I guess, just not. I'm sure there were other cities around America, for sure. Obviously, there were that had this, but not Miami.
Thank you so much for listening to In Defense of Ska. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you normally stream or download episodes. If you haven't already, grab a copy of my book, In Defense of Ska, available at clashbooks.com. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. It's at In Defense of Ska. And please consider joining our Patreon at patreon.com/In Defense of Ska. You will get monthly bonus episodes, extended interviews and commentary per episode, and access to the In Defense of Ska Discord. In Defense of Ska would not be possible without the great team that tirelessly works on it every week. So you should go check out their other projects as well. Co-host Adam Davis has an amazing band called Omnigon. Give them a follow on Instagram and Twitter. It's simply @Omnigon. And our editor, Chris Reeves, has a phenomenal record label and podcast called Ska Punk International. For more information, go to skapunkinternational.com. And if you've ever enjoyed one of the highly specific In Defense of Ska memes floating around the interwebs, was likely the work of The Bands I Like Only Charge $18. Find them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And on that note, we leave you by saying, ska now more than ever. Alrighty, we have a great episode this week with Turner Sparks, who lots of content about Sacramento.
Man, I was pretty juiced to have Turner be so into Link 80.
Sure. There's a bonus episode where we got some additional interview with him. We talk about what did we talk about?
Someone,
It was
someone pretending to be Mike Park.
Oh yeah, that's right. And they emailed him for a show in Santa Cruz.
You got to hear that.
Oh yeah, and then there's a whole thing with him and Larry the Cable Guy. It's such a strange connection, so I think that's worth checking out. So how do people listen to it?
They can subscribe to the Patreon for only $5. They'll be able to check out all the bonus content that we have behind the curtain. So much back there. So many moments where, in the interview, it might feel a little formal. As soon as people know that it's, behind the curtain, sort of a little bit off the record, things loosen up.
Yeah. And listen next week. Next week, we have a great episode with 3 members of Against All Authority.
Against All Authority. I never thought I'd get to talk to these guys.
Yeah. So if you are not already subscribing to the podcast, subscribe to the podcast so that you will not miss this episode when it comes up.
Subscribe to the podcast, tell a friend, share the episodes when they come out. And if you can, subscribe to the Patreon. It really helps.
All right. Thank you so much.